This one is going to be super fun or super contentious. So basically, the idea of the best game ever, the best whatever, excuse me, it sort of has different categories in my mind, because there's sort of like the consensus of the best game ever, which would be sort of the critical consensus or the consensus of the gaming community at large, or it trends towards trying to be the most objective, you know, best game ever. So that would be one version of that. Then you have, for me, my personal, what I would say is the objective best game ever, or my favorite game right now, or something like that. Then you have the third category of my favorite games with nostalgia as a big factor, like my favorite game, I'll just cut right to it. We'll go right for the nostalgia vein first, is probably Metal Gear Solid 3, Snake Eater. The Subsistence version where you can move the camera. But there's games that have come out since then, which is obviously like 20 years or whatever, that I would say are better games or more engaging games, or maybe not more engaging, but there's been better games since 2006 or whenever that came out, 2005. But those newer, better games will never be that game for me, just because it was at a point in my life where I was very impressionable, and it was a very important aspect of shaping my tastes in games and stuff like that. And so it's just one of those things where the nostalgia game is kind of hard to dethrone. Sorry, the glare of the screen in my glasses is bothering me. Yeah, so you take it back to your childhood, and it just gives you the rose-colored glasses, and everything from that time feels warm and fuzzy, and hopefully. But like Crash Bandicoot or Spyro, those are just some of the first games I've ever played. And I think that the PlayStation 2, for me, beyond the PlayStation 1, was just like a real stride, like a real leap or a change in sort of my gaming habits or whatever. Like I played a lot of GameCube as well. But for the PlayStation 2, it really like started to, I don't want to say mature, but like it became more intricate. It evolved into, that was sort of where I started to be kind of a little more critical of games, where that was the beginning of that. Another game that I would say top 3 for nostalgia would be Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, the Subsistence version. Kingdom Hearts 2 is a big one. With Kingdom Hearts, I didn't actually play the first one first. I, had some friends that had it, and I had seen some bits of it, as it were. But I just started right with Kingdom Hearts 2, and what was cool about that is, I was missing out on the Sora in the background, but in Kingdom Hearts 2, you don't start as Sora, you start as Roxas. So Roxas has always been my favorite character just because of that. And, he's cool. His Organization 13 sort of hooded version is cool too. Dual wielding keyblades, that's cool. Dual wielding anything is pretty much cool. But it was just such a perfect blend of sort of like this anime, like over the top action with this sort of like fantastic, whimsical, stuff going on. Then you had like the Final Fantasy characters were still in it. They kind of weren't really much in 3. it was just this perfect storm for like, if you were like 10 to like 16 or 15 when that came out, maybe slightly younger, it's you were right there every step of the way, just loving it. And I was, it's a great game. It's a great playthrough. There's a lot to do. There's obviously like the Little Mermaid section. People think the sort of like rhythm game is kind of dumb, and like it is, but there's enough of the rest of the game in there that like it's fine enough to have this weird part, like, break it up. But yeah, the different worlds, the different outfits. I'm a big sucker for like customization and outfits and attire in games, and secret outfits and alternate outfits. And Kingdom Hearts 2 doesn't really have that per se, but most of the worlds that you go to, his clothes change like automatic. Like there's like a Tron world and he gets all Tron-y. In The Lion King, he turns into a lion. So I digress. Kingdom Hearts 2, great. Great game. Go play it. Man, there was a third PS2 game that I was thinking of that was like really important to me also. But I guess I'm forgetting it. So maybe it's not that important. So maybe I'll go back to that if I remember it. So yeah, the nostalgia compared to today, like I'm almost 30 now, and I was playing those games when I was like 10 to 12 or whatever, so let's just say 15 odd years ago. And like, where do they stand in my heart or as a place in my life nowadays, because it's sort of like an old friend. It's like, yeah, I love that, and I love the time that we had together, and that'll never change, but it's just sort of in the background right now. Just, it's like they've done their work. They did their job. They got to me, and I appreciate them for everything that they did, and they don't need to still be there. And I can always go back. I mentioned in a previous episode, one of the best things about video games, I think, is that you can always go back and the video game is the same. There's exceptions. Obviously, things get delisted or online games aren't on, but broadly speaking, I can go back and play Kingdom Hearts 2 and it'll be just like it was back then, or I can play the HD version, whatever, but it'll be like I never left. And you can re-experience that, and it'll be the same but different, because now it's like the river thing. Like no one steps on the same river twice, because the river's not the same river, and the man isn't the same man. I'm not trying to compare that directly to games, but the idea is that me approaching a game as someone that's never played it and is also 12 is different than me approaching a game that I played when I was 12 as a 28-year-old. But it's more food for thought, and that's sort of the idea of this whole channel, is just more and more food for thought, just thinking out loud about stuff, and to other people, if anyone comments, whatever. So now I want to shift into the next sort of column of favorites or GOATs or best games ever, and that is my favorites now. Like as a 28-year-old, what are my favorites, sort of disregarding the nostalgia weight, because like I mentioned, I don't really think about Kingdom Hearts 2 that much anymore. I don't really think about Metal Gear Solid 3 as much, and they haven't really had entries in a while. Kingdom Hearts 3 came out in 2018 or something like that, and then Metal Gear Solid 5 was 2015. And there hasn't been much of anything on Metal Gear. Well, I guess there's a remake of Metal Gear Solid 3 coming out, so I guess that's relevant. But, right now, if you were to ask me right now, like, what are some of my favorite games and why, I can't even think of a game that's necessarily, like, super new that's my favorite. Like, Dragon's Dogma 2 came out this year, and it's really good. I didn't actually finish it. I should go back to it, but that's really, really good, really cool. I don't know if it's my favorite, though. When I think about the last handful of years, the ones that really stand out to me are kind of similar. It's Ghost of Tsushima by Sucker Punch and Rockstar Games Red Dead Redemption 2. I think that they both do the best job at fulfilling the fantasy that you have in your head. Like, obviously, video games can fulfill fantasies that aren't necessarily directly related to a movie or being in a movie or whatever. Like the Samurai Fantasy, obviously samurai were real, but it's informed, culturally by movies and stuff like that, and anime or whatever it is. And same thing with cowboys. It's like, yeah, cowboys were a real thing, and they did have, six shooters, and they didn't necessarily have like quick draw shootouts, but there was gunfights. And but culturally it's the movies and stuff, and the aesthetic of it and the vibe of it, and those two games in particular, Red Dead 2 being 2018, the end of 2018, and Ghost of Tsushima being the middle of 2020. There's a polish to them, there's a finesse to them, there's like a class to them, like they're really well done. It's like a really well written letter. It has a clear message, but it's just nice. It's it comes across like it knows what it wants to be and knows how to tell you. Some games struggle with knowing what they kind of want to be, or if they know what they want to be, sometimes they have a hard time conveying that to the player, like getting it into the interactive aspect. Like something like The Last of Us 2, it knows what it wants to be, but it has a hard time, giving you the reins and taking them away, and being like, how much agency should you have, and like what exactly is the main crux of it, because it's really the narrative, and so there's a lot of cutscenes. Whereas a game like Red Dead Redemption 2 or Ghost of Tsushima, they have strong narratives, they have a lot of cutscenes, but it's the world, it's the setting. You can go and exist in the world, and I'm not saying that, a game necessarily has to be open as opposed to linear for that to be the case. And a lot of linear games, soak you in the world and the setting, like a BioShock, but I digress. My definition of favorite games now are like ones that really spark my desire to think about them and tell people about them and appreciate them. Like I really appreciate development studios that are really talented, and release products that are really good and fresh and make big waves, really. Not to say that like indie games or smaller games, can't be as impressive or whatever, but so many games nowadays come out sort of janky or broken or whatever. It's nice that these sort of games that come out every now and then can just completely be digestible as is. Like there's not anything complex about it or anything obstructing you from enjoying it, and some games sort of you almost have to enjoy in spite of them in a way. Like I like the Assassin's Creed games, I like the newer ones. I'm playing Origins still, which is the Egyptian one, and there's a lot of great stuff in there, but it is weighed down by the sort of like padding and bulk of it, where like you could have streamlined it a bit, and vice versa. Red Dead Redemption 2 kind of is weighed down by its, light simulation, light cowboy aspects, where like you have to, eat and take care of your horse and cut your hair and like all this stuff, but it really helps ground you in it and ends up being sort of a boon to its presentation. Another one, let me see my time here, about halfway through. Okay, that works. Another one of my favorites from the last few years, which is not as recent, so I don't feel nostalgia for this necessarily. If I went back and played the first one, I probably would. But I'm not gonna lump this into the nostalgia thing because I was an adult when this game came out. But anyways, the Division series, the Division 1 was 2016 or 2015. I think it was 2016. And Division 2 was 2019. And these games I always really liked because it was a new franchise, not a new IP, but a new franchise for the PlayStation 4 generation and the Xbox One, whereas a lot of games still at that time, and still to this day, were continuations and sequels of previous things. Last of Us almost made it onto PS4, but it was still on PS3, so like technically that was a PlayStation 3 franchise in the same way that Uncharted was, even though they had Uncharted 4, which is also a cool game. But the Division just really, again, like it knows what it is. Maybe it doesn't know what it is. At the time, maybe it was a little confused, but what it conveys to the player is, again, soaking you in the atmosphere and strong gameplay, like really just putting the gameplay first, and the story is almost a back seat. The setting is more of the narrative elements than it is, the actual plot of what you're doing, which makes sense for a game like that. But when I think about my modern favorites, it is The Division, it is Red Dead Redemption 2, it is Ghost of Tsushima, and like, I like Insomniac Spider-Man. I haven't played the second one because I don't have a PS5, but that was good. I don't know if it's my favorite though. It's not like one of those ones that I like still think about, that I like am a fan of. Like Red Dead Redemption 1 is pretty much in the nostalgia camp. Like it's up there. So 2 was like a big culmination, and then Ghost of Tsushima is almost the opposite, where it was a new IP, it was a new franchise, and I hope they make a sequel. But it was almost like a surprise, like we all saw that it was a cool samurai game and we wanted it to be good, and it was from a Sony first party, so we knew that they were going to have the production value behind it. But I think a lot of people that played it didn't know that it was going to be that good. It was like really good, like debatably 10 out of 10 material, really just hit at home. And that is something that I still sort of think about and still wish I could sort of get another one of soon. And in a way I have. To me, Jedi Survivor, or Star Wars Jedi Survivor, the one that came out last fall or something like that. Anyways, that game was that for me. I played it later. I didn't play it at launch because I was sort of like taking a backseat for games for a little. But that was one of the ones where not only did it sort of like really catch my attention and wrap me up in it, and I always was thinking about it when I wasn't playing and wanted to keep playing it. It also kept me engaged the whole way through, and honestly really surprised me with like how good and how much there was in that game that I wasn't necessarily expecting, because I played the first one, and the first one I like a lot, but it was definitely, some of it was just bolstered by the Star Wars aspect, and Jedi Survivor is still a lot, but they also sort of expand the Star Wars aspect. Like it's almost like, yeah, it's being helped by the Star Wars aspect, but also the Star Wars aspect is better as well. And the gameplay is better. A lot more options. It's just a good one, so I guess chalk that up, throw that there in some of the modern favorites, and I'm sure I'm still missing some, like Witcher 3 is pretty good. That's getting kind of old. I don't know, I guess I kind of haven't played that many newer games the past like year or two, so all my favorite games are more of like the end of the teens and like 2020. But that's because I didn't prepare for this at all, and I didn't look them up or think about them. Because surely there was cool games around. Well, speaking of cool games that were around and also of that time period and relevant right now, just checking my time here. Perfect, right on time. The third column that I want to talk about of best games would be, we have the nostalgia one, the best, my favorite game in my heart. And you have my current favorite, thing that I would say is my best game right now. Which again, I'll say Red Dead Redemption 2. The last column would be, what is like the most objective, critically best game in terms of like the definition of a game, what it does, how it interacts with the player, what is the best. If you could quantify that, which you can't because it's art, what would it be? And in my mind, there's really only one answer at the moment, and that's Elden Ring. Plenty of people have talked about Elden Ring and said how cool and good it is, so I'm not going to belabor that point specifically. But Elden Ring, in terms of being, quote unquote, the objective best game ever, it just does so much so well and in such a gamey way. It is almost nothing but gameplay. Not to say that games that have a strong narrative aren't games or like aren't important or can't be the best game ever or whatnot. In some ways for a while, I would say The Last of Us 1 might have been the best game ever, Certainly at the time, it would have been the one that I would have shown to people to be like, this is what games can be. Whereas Elden Ring is almost the opposite. Elden Ring is like not the game that you would show other people, like, here's the best example of games for people that don't play games. And like, see, look, we're real art too. Elden Ring is a game for gamers. It is a capital G, a video game. Capital V, a video game. It almost has like a trend line through like the beginning of gaming. You have these sort of like, you're a character, you're going through a map, you're getting a MacGuffin, eventually you have like leveling up, blah, blah, blah. Like there's DNA in there all the way through Ocarina of Time or the original Legend of Zelda, like all the way through the actual previous Souls games and all the RPGs and the fantasy stuff. Like it really is such a sophisticated love letter to just game design and character design and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, there's so much variety in enemies, in character builds, in the world, in the setting, so much to explore. It's so interactive, not necessarily in like a, like you can flush a toilet or whatever, you can get something out of a vending machine sort of interactive. But I just mean, it's very much putting you in that world and letting you exist and do the things in that world that you need to do without having it be like a weird simulation thing. Like it's not like, a Skyrim where there's a little bit more elements of sort of like simulating a world and you can sort of just bop around and exist and whatever. It maintains its game-like quality through and through. Like you're a hero, you have a sword or whatever, you have to beat the bad guys. It's almost like you have each area with like an area boss. Like that's what I mean is it's like such an evolution of almost like these fundamental game design tropes without making them seem like tropes. Like it's such a modern version of all those ideas all wrapped up in one and done so well. Let me peep at my time here. It just really accomplishes what a lot of other games, most of the games have strived to do and fall short, and that's what is really exciting about games. And the best games ever and the greatest of all time is to sort of, bookend those three columns of the best game ever. I just want to say that the best game ever is constantly evolving, and that's what makes it so enjoyable to watch what is happening, because I know that eventually Elden Ring is going to be topped, just like Elden Ring topped other things before it. A lot of people before Elden Ring said like Breath of the Wild, The Legend of Zelda, The Breath of the Wild, or is it The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild? Anyways, and then Elden Ring came about, and there's always someone that's cooking that's just waiting for their turn. They're they have something that no one else really knows how good it is, or they maybe they don't even know how good it is, and they've just been like nose to the grindstone, like trying to blacksmith it to be perfectly flawless and exactly what they want it to be, and not every not every game studio is tasked with churning out crap in a short amount of time so that it gets to market quicker, or whatever. There's some studios that have worked hard for a long time and made a name for themselves and gotten to put themselves in a position where they have the respect and the trust and the funding to have those like really just like sit on it and work on it and let it be what it's going to be type of things. And like Grand Theft Auto 6 is coming out next year, and I think Grand Theft Auto won't necessarily dethrone Elden Ring. It's almost a different thing. Like Grand Theft Auto has kind of turned into this thing where it's different than a lot of other games, but they also sort of not cannibalized, but they sort of sucked the space out of the air for games that were like it. Like there used to be a lot of Grand Theft Auto clones, like True Crime and blah blah blah, Saints Row, and now it's just like GTA 5 and Grand Theft Auto Online has gotten so big that it's almost like a different thing. I compare it to Destiny a lot in terms of like it's one of the first like truly like live games on consoles, like disregarding MMOs and stuff like that. Like Destiny and Grand Theft Auto Online were sort of neck and neck there in terms of release, and 10 years later, now we're finally seeing that sort of like a decade of this is what it really is going to be, moving forward, and what it's like. And Grand Theft Auto Online just came out with an update today, I think, and Destiny 2 just had their big expansion just come out like a month ago or something like that. And Destiny and Destiny 2, I guess, but like overall those games and game services have been going on for a decade now, and it's like, is that stuff that you compare with Elden Ring? Like I guess literally you do in terms of it's a game, but I feel like it's doing such a different thing, and Elden Ring is doing such a pure classic version of a game that if I was being objective, that's what I would pick as the best game ever. If you're into the ludological and game design aspects of a single player game. Whereas like, let's just say GTA 6 comes out and it's better than GTA 5 and blah, blah, blah. Like, does that make it better than Elden Ring? Because they're trying to do so much differently than each other. And it's like, I don't know, that's like The Last of Us 2, you could argue, against Elden Ring, but they're so different. And it's about, for me, as a game with game design, you're navigating sort of progression and interaction and challenge and things like that. And I just don't think that The Last of Us 2 or Grand Theft Auto 6 are necessarily navigating the same waters. They're almost sort of, it's like sort of trying to say like realism versus impressionism or something like that. It's like, yeah, they're different flavors, but there's different techniques for the same thing. And you can have a best impressionistic painting, quote unquote, but it's different than the best realistic painting or the best, whatever, Picasso thing, Cubism. So with that, I'm wrapping up here. I feel like I got a lot out, and it just again makes me excited for the future. There's a lot of cool games on the horizon that I'm excited for. There's another Star Wars game coming out soon, so like I would be lucky to be here a year from now or two or whatever and say like, yeah, these games have been dethroned and I have a new favorite. But it always goes back to Metal Gear Solid 3, like that 12-year-old version of yourself is always in there, and it's such a special time in your life. And when I go think about that time and what really like captured my imagination, it was that game in Kingdom Hearts 2. And let me think. There was another one. If I think too long, I'll just cut my thinking out and I'll just snap right to me thinking of it. God, PS2. I'm gonna look it up and then put the clip of me talking about it at the end. Okay, if you watched all the way to this, I appreciate it. I just looked through a bunch of PS2 games and I can't find what I was thinking of, so maybe I was just thinking of something that wasn't on PS2. But I looked at all these PS2 games and I just kept remembering all these different games that I played, all these hits, all these ones that I would do honorable mentions for or something like that. So I think maybe next week I might just do PS2 games. So thanks for watching.